Hi, it's me, Cherie Pie. I'm looking forward to saying hello to my friends who are out there. I know once again I'm talking to myself, but you know what? That's okay. I think eventually somebody is gonna want to BS with BS with me. So the last time I was on, I was telling you a little bit about myself and what I like to do and what I believe in and what my goals are, which are to do some really cool videos and hopefully they won't be too grainy. I did a couple, but the editing is really a bugger. Um, I've been using, which one is it? Oh, I've been using Power Director 15. And I have been going online and trying to do a lot of they have all of these tutorials and I'm trying to learn how to do all of those, but it's definitely not as easy as it seems. So, today I am thinking about my past. And we all got one of them. And sometimes we forget about the stuff that happened in the past, and it's probably better that way, anyways, right? So, what I want to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about my plans. Now, I started one book so far, and I'm really enjoying that. I've been working on it for 7 years because I had a lot of I had to look up 15th century life and what it was like. And if, you know, I wanted it to be somewhat accurate. I mean, that only makes sense, right? You don't want to write a bunch of garbage. So I've been working on this book for 15 years and yeah, we rip a bodice in it. Yeah, it's true. I understand the ripping bodice stories now. But it is the way people dressed back then. And so that's kind of one of the things that happens. It's about a lineage of witches and how they deal with life and how people are frightened of them because a lot of them were midwives. And it took a long time before women had the ability to become doctors. And I think the doctor's name, the first one who started treating women, was Tarantula. It's something Tarantula. It's in the book. I gotta look it up again myself. So I'm working on that one, but I have started a new book, and this one is very close and dear to me because it's about my family. Um, I'm going to put a message here and hopefully somebody comes on. Um, I put, have you had any strange things happen in your family? Now, where I'm going with this new book I'm writing, it's called The Sins of the Father. And I did some research regarding the sins of the father, and the sins of the father have to do with if someone's father does something that is very immoral or bad, it ends up following 4 generations of people. And so that would be, well, my grandfather, my dad, my brothers and sisters, and then my own children. It's really sad, actually. Here, somebody's asking me on my phone how to get here. Here, let me just let them know. Please excuse me. I do enjoy being on tape. So, pardon me. So much stuff, so much electronics. I just feel like I'm surrounded by them sometimes, I'll tell you. So, anyways, the sins of the father last 4 generations. And that's really sad because we don't even have to go out of our way to do something that's, goes against God or whatever, because our parents did it for us. So, anyways, where I'm starting from, and the reason that I have 4 generations that I'm dealing with is I went on to Ancestry.com, and it is incredible. I first was told it's a bunch of BS, right? But the truth is, hang on. Ay. You know what I'll do just to get one listener, I'm telling you. My goal here now, I wanted to do live too, live shows every day, but it's exhausting. So what I decided was that I'm going to start once a week, maybe twice a week, but once a week on a Sunday or a Monday. And then I'm going to do my filming. And then I'm going to go from there. So what happened to me was my father's parents, my grandparents, were from the Ukraine. Now, I looked up on Ancestry.com, and I found out my grandmother was actually Polish, which really blew my mind. Now, if you look back to what was going on in the 40s and 50s, well, no, I'm sorry, the 30s, would have been the 20s and 30s. In the Ukraine and in Poland, there was a lot of upheaval and fighting. And my grandfather and his cousin went to a church, and they stood in line, and along, coming in the other direction, were females. And so as the males would go through, because they wanted to have Slavic wives, they would go through, and if the male saw someone who they thought was attractive, they would say, "Will you marry me?" Which is what my grandfather did. And so he ended up with my grandmother. She said yes. He was an attractive man, and she was quite lovely, although he did have 10 years on her. Now, my grandmother's sister was behind her. And when she came up behind her, she saw my grandfather and thought, "Ooh la la, I like him." But the problem was, he had already asked my grandmother to marry him. So she was angry. But what she did was she married my grandfather's cousin. And his name was Mike. Cousin that I know of. I'm still trying to figure this out because I don't want to write a book that has um, the wrong information in it. That's just not right. Oh, and yes, my foot is still, ow, injured. Docky says I get to start walking again between the 1st and the 14th. Thank goodness. So they ended up getting married. What they did, rather than take a boat, like you hear about so many Slavic people or people, the Irish, they would come over on a boat and they'd pass, the Statue of Liberty, and they'd find their way. But that is not what my grandparents did. What they did was they came all the way down, and I should have brought a map. They came down through Siberia. Can you imagine? And into Canada. And once they made it through Canada, they got paperwork which allowed them to come and settle in Detroit, which is where I am from. And I had to admit, I really liked growing up in Michigan and Detroit. I'm currently living in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of history here, but I miss my home right now. So, as time went on, my grandparents had, my father was the first one, then his brother, and then a sister. And then my grandmother was saying that she wanted to divorce my grandfather. But he would not have that. He spent all of his life trying to build a family, filled a fortune for his family. He wanted to retire at a farm that they owned. Now, she ended up having triplet daughters. And they were famous because we're talking a long time ago in the 40s. Now, if you were going to have triplets, it was not something that came naturally. You didn't go and get an injection to have multiple children. She just ended up having triplets, and they became Detroit's Little D's. And I actually saw a lot of articles about them in the newspaper. It was very cool. But it did not come without much sorrow. The beginning of my family's sadness, the beginning of my family's, well, okay. I got the newspaper when I was on Ancestry.com. I found it. I had heard about it. When I was a young girl, I remember going to my grandfather's funeral on my mother's side. Now, what happened was I was sitting in the back seat wearing a coat I hated, but I was forced to wear because it was appropriate. And I asked my father, I said, Dad, can we go to Grandma and Grandpa's, where they're buried, and put some flowers and maybe do something? And my mother, okay, now she was a schizophrenic and did not have much in the line of being proper or easygoing. She said, your grandfather killed your grandmother, and then he killed himself. They weren't in a car accident. I was about 8, in between 8 and 10, and I felt myself melt. All of a sudden, my mother said, they're not buried in the same place in the cemetery. And I was so sad. And I started to cry. And I cried. And I remember That was something that was just taboo. It was not something, it was so scandalous during the time it happened. It did happen in 1951. And I finally, when I went into Ancestry, I found my parents, my grandparents' news article, and it was extremely sad. And so begins the sins of the father. No matter how we try to be good people, sometimes bad things happen. And in my family, we've got this Ukrainian and Polish background. It turns out Polish because I thought my grandmother was Ukrainian, but she was Polish. I found the paperwork. We have tempers. We have very bad tempers. And I know I myself, I can have a very sharp tongue. I think that's what my second husband told me. Oh, you have a sharp tongue. But as I've gotten older, my anger has subsided. I'm not quite the evil witch I once was. But my grandfather, he wouldn't have it. She actually made him lunch and prepared for him to go back to work. And he took a deer rifle and he killed her, and then he killed himself with the 7-year-old daughters playing on the front yard. It's so sad. It shouldn't be. But what happened, happened. So that is kind of the beginning of where my Sins of the Father book will take off. I'm going to do a little more research because I think that their lives were so complicated and difficult that their only goal was to get out of poverty, to get out of the Ukraine, which the USSR, which is what it was at the time, took half of the Ukraine because they were socialists. They would come, or excuse me, they would come to the houses, not socialists. They were, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? They would go around to the various houses and see how many chickens you had. And if you had too many, they would take them. I was told I had a great uncle, and I think I have his photo, and I will bring that next time, that he refused to go with them to fight in the war, and he vanished. And it wasn't till the next spring on the farm that they found his body underneath a haystack. So we can complain about our government, I guess. I was in the military, so I am pro-military. I care about our soldiers. My goal was to become a drug and alcohol or an addictions counselor to work with soldiers who were coming back from Iraq and, all those awful sandy areas. My problem was it's a very long education, and I'm kind of exhausted, to be honest. So I'm going to try to make people happy instead because there's so much pain. There are soldiers committing suicide every day. And they do it a lot on the VA property. so that their families won't find them. It makes me so incredibly sad. But at least we don't have people who come and grab us in the middle of the night and tell us we're going to fight and send us who knows where. And if we refuse, then it's the end. So I'm happy. I'm happy and I'm sad. And I'm going to continue to do my work on ancestry. I highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in finding out about their lineage. And I've got some more interesting stories for the next time I'm on. So I hope to see you. This is Cherie Pie, and I'm going to be filming this afternoon. I've got a surprise for you. So please enjoy. And remember, we are all blessed, right? Thank you. I'll see you later.